space government, whether it's a national government or a local, again, having that government behind you really helps to take you forward. Creating the right regulatory environment, depending on whether it's a nation state or a state or a local town or local city, again, having the right regulatory environment is important. Creating industry awareness, again, it's letting people know you're out there. It's letting people know you have something to offer, to make them look at you, to let them decide whether you're the place to go. And demonstrating commitment. Again, people, I think it's, because this is such a rapidly growing area, it attracts other people thinking, oh, they have a local space industry, maybe we should too. But it's important that if you do put your head above the parapet, that you demonstrate that commitment. You're going to be there for the long term. You're not just in there in the short term to get the business and then move on to another focus, whether it's biotech or whatever. It's showing that commitment in the space area. Just moving on now, what I'd like just to do is talk a little bit about the financing side. I like this quote, to put business in space, you must first take out the space out. Again, I think we've all seen people go to financiers for funding for their projects, and they say, no, this is going to be the next great thing, you really must back this. But at the end of the day, it's a business, and you've got to strip it down to the basics strategy. How are they going to make money? The right answers. It needs to be a simple business model. Is it a prototype? Is it a beta or an alpha? Cash flow, looking for break even in about a year, little or no additional investment needed. They're looking for an experienced team with a coachable CEO, a clear path to profit and return, early meaningful contact with potential customers, and a realistic valuation. I've taken this quote from Warren Buffett. Again, these people are busy people. If you're going to go before them, it's getting that 1 minute elevator pitch, a 1-page executive summary, no more than 10 slides, demonstrate intelligence, energy, and integrity. So, okay, how did the Isle of Man start? How did we become a local space industry? A lot of you in the audience today probably know the name of Chris Stott. Chris started up his business in the Isle of Man in 2000 when he formed Mansat. Mansat basically provides orbital filing slots for companies. In 2004, the Isle of Man government brought in zero corporate tax for space companies, a great incentive in the longer term. Again, sometimes that's overlooked. People are concentrated on getting the business going, but it's actually having that business located somewhere that when it is profitable, they get the maximum return. In 2005, we were successful in attracting Inmarsat and SES to establish on the Isle of Man. I took up my role in 2005. In 2008, the International Space University announced the creation of the International Institute of Space Commerce on the Isle of Man. So that was a great endorsement from the ISU. 2009, the world's 5 largest satellite operators established the Space Data Association on the Isle of Man. Again, that was a great development for the SDA. Prior to that, companies kept all the data to themselves as commercially sensitive, but actually they decided it's going to be more beneficial to actually pool that data. And following on the heels of the SDA, the Satellite Interference Group also set up its headquarters on the Isle of Man. And we have an SSPI chapter set up on the Isle of Man in 2013. I'll just go through these very, very quickly. So we've got the zero corporate tax on the Isle of Man, so insurance premium tax on launch or orbit insurance. There are government grants, 40% for all sorts of startup requirements. There's the ability to file 40 geospatial orbital pilot slots through Mansat, and also the launch licenses through the UK Space Agency, for anybody looking for launch licenses. All of those out, given the time we have available, but you can see the further benefits of the Isle of Man. And these are some of the businesses that are on the Isle of Man already. So we've got the not-for-profits like the SDA and the Satellite Interference Group. We've got some of the traditional satellite operators, and then we've got some of the NewSpace type ventures like Excala Realmaz, and also the education through the ISU. Okay, thank you. That was my introduction.
Pamela Welch is the Executive Director for the Midland Development Corporation in Midland, Texas, and has been there since 2006 as Director of Business Retention Expansion and Vice President of Business Development. We've heard a lot about Midland at this conference already, and so congratulations on your work.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about how you've made it happen.
Okay, we are the new person on the block, and but Midland, and what I really have to do is explain where Midland is to people most of the time. In fact, on my card, I have a map on the back that shows you where we are in Texas. But we are in West Texas, and President Bush always used to say that Midland, when he lived there, that the sky's the limit, but now we call it the sky is no longer the limit. But we are a community of entrepreneurs because of the wildcatting of the oil and gas industry. So we're used to new frontiers. We started the oil and gas. We are the second largest oil and gas producing shale in the world. So we have more oil wells than we do people. And that's one of the attractions that the commercial space industry has found, is the fact of the open space out in West Texas. Blue Origin is just down the road from us, and West Texas is a desert climate, so it works well for the aerospace and the commercial space industry. I can figure out which one goes up. Is it? We have, of course, in Texas, there's a lot of aerospace companies. The commercial space companies so far that are there are the Blue Origin, SpaceX, X-Corp Orbital Outfitters, and Firefly. There is a lot of other aerospace companies in Texas. We have 4 spaceports now. I believe they've already talked about them. Ours is the Midland International Air and Spaceport. You have the Boca Chica Beach for SpaceX in Brownsville, and then the new Houston Ellington Field and Blue Origin's site in West Texas. The aviation is not new to Texas. 1,000 workers in the aerospace industry. We also have 15 active military bases, which supply a lot of workforce for the aerospace industry. The Office of the Governor, I'll have to talk, instead of just about Midland, I'll have to talk, the governor would be upset if I didn't talk about them. He was just in New York. Y'all are lucky he wasn't out here, but he'll probably be out in California soon. Governor Perry did a lot with the aerospace and the commercial space industry, and Governor Abbott is following along in those footsteps. They have a very active aerospace division at the governor's office. We've just passed legislation this session that allows spaceports to actually be part of the advisory committee for the governor's office. And so we will have representation for the commercial space industry at the governor's office. The Midland International and Air and Spaceport is really what I market. I market Midland as a whole. In Texas, economic development is really done at the local level. Most states do theirs at the state level. But in Texas, our legislators allowed us to take a portion of our sales tax for economic development. So almost every city in Texas has either a Type A or a Type B sales tax. The Type A is specifically for economic development, the recruitment of new businesses and the expansion of existing businesses. In Midland, we have a quarter cent of our sales tax goes for economic development, which is what funds our programs. We have a lot of different types of, we are an economic development corporation. We're not a venture capital firm, but we do assist with relocations of new companies, with workforce training. We can do what we call, they're loans, but they're forgivable loans. Your loan is forgiven if you create the number of jobs or the amount of payroll that you've told us in your contract that you will do, or if you have invested a certain amount of capital investment into our community. our main goal is to raise our tax base in Midland by bringing companies that bring new money into our area. But the Air and Spaceport, we received our certification last September. It was very exciting. We worked for 2 solid years with AST and the FAA. And if any of you are out there, thank you for all the hard work you did. It was challenging because we were making them, they had the vision, thank goodness, to understand that you could do commercial aircraft along with commercial space aircraft. We will be launching horizontally, but we have, one of our main attractions is we are an international airport, so we have all of the infrastructure in place. We didn't have to start from scratch. We have a lot of acreage. We have our business park that we are developing that's 50 acres with land on the tarmac or on taxiways. We're putting in about over $7 million in infrastructure at the business park with utilities and roads. We want to make our businesses and our launch operators as successful as possible by providing them with the infrastructure that they need to operate at a low cost. We have a master plan done already on the Space Business Park. Those are some of the renderings, which makes us look a little better. We are in the desert. I'll show you another picture that shows you a little bit more about what we look like. They've put a lot of trees into our renderings, and we are an airport. We keep telling the landscape architect, you don't want birds. So trees may not be what we really want out there, but this is kind of an overlay of the business park. X-Core is on your bottom part there, and right across the street, Little Outfitters. Trying to think, yeah, there's another aerial view that gives you a little bit of idea of all of the little white things you see out there are oil wells. We even have them on the airport property. We like to put oil wells wherever we can. They fund the airport quite a bit. We do have the infrastructure also includes 2 cities, Midland and Odessa, which are, the airport is in the middle. It is the Midland airport. Odessa didn't pay for it, but we keep reminding them that. But we have a population of over 350,000 people, so you can fly directly into Midland for your customers. We have American, United, and Southwest that fly to 6 hubs out of Midland. So you can get there easily, and you have all the amenities of a metropolitan area. The tenants, of course, you've heard are X-Core. We assisted X-Core with funding for relocation, and most of the money that we gave to X-Core was used for the renovation of their facility, which will be is already a world-class facility. They've completed almost all of the construction. They're moving their employees in as we speak for the next couple of months. Close to 100 employees from California and other parts of the country will be moving to Midland. I don't know if Jeff Grayson is in here. There he is. He's already got his house and he's unpacking boxes. And then Will, I think with Orbital Outfitters, he may not be up yet. Will doesn't get up early. But he's also living in Midland, can attest to the quality of life. But Orbital Outfitters building is under construction, almost completed. In the next 60 to 90 days will be completely finished. And what we're excited about there, we're very excited about X-Core and the links, but we're also excited about the altitude chamber. And I don't know if you've heard a lot about it, but this is a one-of-a-kind altitude chamber. Most altitude chambers have just a little window that you look in, and as you can see, our suit chamber, which is the big bubble down there with the person sitting in it, can hold 2 people in suits for testing. And then the cabin chamber is in construction, should be arriving about the time that the building is complete, the next 90 days. It's in Mobile, Alabama, being tested at this point. We are trying to bring in resources that are common use to the commercial space and the aerospace industry, so that we have the type of testing facilities that you need. This helps us attract companies to Midland. We felt like being out in the middle of Texas, it's a little hard for people to imagine coming. So we're trying to get as many resources, common use equipment, and other resources that can lower the cost of operating for companies that come to Midland. And that's it.
Thank you. Amaresh Kolapara is a seasoned consultant, financial advisor, and entrepreneur with expertise. He's a founder and managing partner of Earth to Orbit LLC, which is a global provider of advisory services for the satellite industry. Amaresh, can you tell us about your work?
Absolutely. Thanks, Alex. So I'm kind of the odd person out on this panel because I'm actually representing economic development for India. So as much as 1.2 billion people can be considered a local region, we'll go with that for now. But India is kind of a paradox. Before I jump in, actually, my background, actually, I represent a company called Earth to Orbit, and we're basically a professional service company. We provide consulting services to small satellite customers and clients. We essentially provide two major things. One is we guide small satellites through the launch process, and we broker launches on the Indian vehicle called the PSLV. And we also resell satellite images from India. India's got one of the largest civil Earth observation satellite constellation. So we resell those images here in the US and abroad as well. So India, from a NewSpace or space ecosystem perspective, is kind of a paradox, quite a big paradox. As most of you know, the Indian Space Agency has had extreme successes over the last few years. A successful moon mission, a successful Mars mission, like I said before, one of the largest Earth observation satellite constellations in the world, a civil one at least. They are starting an astronaut training center in Bangalore. They have the PSLV vehicle, which is known as one of the most successful launch vehicles of its time. It has, to date, as of last week, 29 consecutive successful launches. Launched throughout its history, about 72 payloads total thus far. And a lot of other successes as well. A very, very robust ground station network. And these successes are actually now going forward. There are plans to do a reusable launch vehicle. There are plans to do a lunar rover. There are plans to have a full-fledged manned program sometime starting hopefully in about 10 years. And so on one side, you've got this very robust, very successful space agency that's doing a lot of these successful things at very, very low cost. But yet there's a new space ecosystem that's being developed. In fact, a lot of the incentives and platforms that India is using in general pales in comparison to basically environments that my other panelists are presenting here today. Pales in comparison. So one thing that India is kind of pointing to, and Earth to Orbit is actually helping the space agency and the government kind of do this, is it's utilizing a lot of the space agency's successes to foster interest in the space sector. So one example I can give you is I was in India during the Mars mission, the Mars orbiter that India launched, which was very successful, and that also launched on the PSLV rocket. And that day, there was an estimate that about 450 million people watched it. And the Prime Minister gave a talk, and every school kid in India that entire day was about the Mars mission. So the entire curricula for hundreds of millions of school kids was about Mars. And I was trying to think back on when was the last time something like that occurred here in the States, where you had 40 to 50% of the population watching one space event and listening to the president talk, and having all the school kids in the country watch one space event and have the curriculum focused on that one event. And maybe the audience would know better than me, but I would think it had to be back in the Apollo era, but not something after that. So what India's experiencing right now is what I would call India's Apollo era. It's being done on a shoestring budget in comparative terms. But what that is doing is it's actually fostering an influx of interest. So after the Mars mission, my company has gotten hundreds of emails from prospective applicants that want to join the space industry, that want to do something about it. There's tens of thousands of engineers that graduate every year, thousands of aerospace engineers, but not many places for them to actually work within India, outside of the civil sector. And so one way that India is kind of looking at this is looking at it from the perspective of other sectors that India, namely the IT, software, and the traditional tech sector that India is kind of known for. And that sector is flourishing. And it has flourished due to several incentives the government has provided, namely large tech centers in cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad that have been developed by the government, tax waivers, real estate for cheap, trade incentives, and there's been a whole list of things that has helped that industry become what it is today. India's kind of known for that tech industry. In addition, that's kind of fostered growth in the investment sector. So there's now a fledgling VC and angel community in India that's actually doing quite well. That's investing in these types of tech plays that I talked about earlier. So one of our board members at Earth to Orbit runs an investment group, an angel group in Bombay, in Mumbai. And his group is actually one of the investors in Flipkart, which is the Amazon.com of India. Started out with $1 billion valuation. Now it's approaching 12 to 13 billion. Pure play startup. But these investors that invest in these types of deals are now looking elsewhere. And one of the areas they're looking elsewhere, I'm kind of biased to say this, but they're looking at the space sector. So within India now, there's not that many new space companies. We like to say Earth to Orbit was the first. Now there's about 10 in total. There's others that are a bit smaller, but they range from a few small satellite companies that are developing small satellites and the bus systems and power systems for that. There are a few Earth observation data analytic companies which are doing quite well. So they take raw satellite images, and given the software expertise of the tech workforce in Bangalore, they basically analyze those images and derive data from it for various markets. There's an ion propulsion company and a few others as well. The space agency also is trying to assist these companies, but slowly. Like I said before, it pales in comparison to what is represented here on the panel. But it is moving along. So the couple examples are the Indian Space Agency offers discounts for universities and nonprofits through collaborations as well as through launch prices. So they give them cheaper launches. And that's kind of fostering more educational university type growth, which is enabling more degrees to be given in those sectors, which is increasing the talent pool. And I always say the two fundamental things to aid in economic development in this sector, or any sector for that matter, you have to have two things. One is talent, and the second thing is money. And right now, India's got tons of talent across all different spectra of what's required for this industry. The money is not quite there yet, and that's what I referred to earlier. Some of these investors that work with us and other sectors are now beginning to look in this area. So what I would say kind of in summary is that even though India is kind of a paradox where you have these amazing space accomplishments, but a very, very fledgling and just about to start out new space sector, that tide is kind of turning. If I would predict in about 5 years, if more money starts flowing in, there's going to be the types of companies like we see here, the X-Cores, the Skybox, the Planet Labs, and others, starting to emerge from India. It's happening in the tech sector, like Flipkart and others. The Amazons and the Facebooks are already appearing there and gaining billion-dollar valuations. And I see no reason why the space sector wouldn't follow suit, because the talent is there, the money is about to come. And in closing, someone in the space agency, the Indian government actually told me this, and I completely believe them, is that one way to view the space agency's expenditures and successes is also, those successes are also a catalyst for economic development. And this is kind of a paraphrasing of what Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about. I'm sure all of you know Neil deGrasse Tyson. I'm about to butcher what he says, but something to this tune of this effect, that large-scale programs, whether they're space agency driven or private driven, they foster a lot of interest. They catalyze a lot of growth. For example, they increase interest in the space sector when you have a big major space event. Like during the Apollo era, people began to learn more about space. There was an increase in uptick in the number of science and math-related degrees, and there's an interest in uptick in those professions afterwards. What's happening in India is very, very similar. There's a increase in uptick in interest in that area. Like I said before, there was this massive spike in emails that we got for people looking for something to do with their new degrees. And so it's the national fervor, it's the space fervor, it's pouring fuel on this good fire, this catalyst fire that's creating some excitement in the country, and that's going on in India now. And so the space agency is kind of viewed as also an economic catalyst because of their successes, and they're marketing themselves as such.
Great. Our final panelist comes to us from Israel. Ofer Lapid has some 25 years experience in aerospace and space program management and technology development. Currently, he's the program manager of the UltraSat Astrophysical Observation Satellite at the Weizmann Institute of Science in collaboration with Caltech and JPL. And he's also the co-founder and CTO of Space Nest, home for Israel's space entrepreneurs. Ofer, welcome.
Morning. Next to India, Israel also has about 10 new space startups with only 7 million population, so we're in good shape. I give you a short overview of Israel because you don't know it much. Israel is the 8th spacefaring nation active in space since 1988. Over the years, we have launched about 12 space missions, most of them defense related, all of them 100% success in orbit, which is a track record. The way the Israeli government managed the space program on those days was on a non-compete basis because all the money was spent as government funding. The government identified centers of excellence, built one prime for now, and several centers of excellence for the payloads and the subsystems. Over the years, we have achieved the complete independence technology-wise. We produce our own radiation-hardened computer chips, all the way to indigenous launchers and satellites. Israel is a startup nation, as you know, with currently more VC coming into the country, overcasting the local VC industry in almost completely. As a result of that, there was a new space policy, a civil space policy announced in 2010, trying to foster a civil commercial space industry. That policy supports the risk sharing of the development and the innovation of the startups with the government. So you can get up to 85% grant over your development cost by the government. That grant becomes a neutral loan if you succeed, and if you fail, it becomes a grant that you don't have to give back. Therefore, if you want to set up a startup, any space-related startup with a development site in Israel, you could apply for those grants. The budget is planned to gradually increase as we have more companies. We already given since 2012 about $12 million to 12 companies as grant money. And those 12 companies, among them 10 are like NewSpace companies. The other two are analytics and data analysis. In order to support space startups, I have teamed with another space professional to set up an incubator, which is set up as a corporate venture fund. I mean, if you have a space startup, you need to have somebody to show you the way and provide all the assistance in setting up. So we teamed with the IAI, the Israeli major prime contractor, which has all the infrastructure to support space activities. And we teamed with the Space Angels Network, Chad and Amir are there in the back, to provide all the envelope a startup requires threefold: the infrastructure, the know-how from the incumbent space industry, as well as the support of the private money that comes from the investors. We hope to raise up to 3 startups per year, and the incubation time is expected to be 3 years at least. This way, they will have a very safe ground to incubate, and when they graduate, they can start working in the local market. Israel is about to be a very busy space year, the next coming year. We have a very good conference that you're all invited in October. It's the IAC 2015, coming back to Jerusalem after 10 years. And the most important thing is next summer, the International Space University is about to take place in Haifa in the Technion. How many ISU people are here? So, guys, this is the only school for space entrepreneurs currently in existence. So if you are serious about going into space, stop first at the International Space University. We have a very active Google Lunar X Prize team based on volunteers, primarily about 200 volunteers doing all the development to recreate the Apollo effect on Israel. And once this lunar mission is successful, all those people will try and look for the next thing to do in space, and they would definitely form startups, new space companies. With that, I conclude, and I invite you all to come to Israel and base your business there.
Great. Thank you. I think it's impressive the variety of economic development strategies that are reflected by the folks up here. I'd like to get the audience involved sooner rather than later, so I have a question for these guys, but if you have questions for us, I'd encourage you to come to the microphones and we'll get to you as quickly as possible. But first, guys, Tim, at the beginning of his presentation, described the space utopia. I don't know that it exists. We got Seattle, but I'll admit that we're not the utopia, right? And Midland's on its way, but, it's Midland. I meant that in a great way, by the way. So is it possible to get all those things, and what's the most important? Amarash, why don't you start?
Sure. It's kind of an extension of what I said before. I think talent and money are the key ingredients. It's like it's probably a bad analogy, but if you're making a pizza, you need your crust, sauce, and cheese. Without that, it's really not going to work. In economic development, especially in startups, you're going to need your talent and money. And all of the policies that we've heard thus far are geared towards that. Without it, and you can talk to many investors, without the talent, there's no money. And so fostering talent or attracting talent is probably one of the major steps that needs to be accomplished. And once that talent is attracted to that particular site or area, if the talent is appropriate, money generally follows. And money can also come through catalyst activities like tax breaks, real estate for free, deferred loans, things like that make that initial ramp up of money much easier. But regardless of where you are, whether you're in Bangalore or Midland, it's still talent and money. It's the two main ingredients.
To add to that, from my experience on the Isle of Man, we've talked to a lot of NewSpace companies, and they say that they're great. The Isle of Man, it's got everything we're looking for, but it's a local source of funding, because they basically say at the end of the day they will go to wherever they're going to get the investment money, because obviously without the investment money they're not going to develop. So I agree totally with what you said. It's about talent and it's about money, but at the end of the day it's the location that can provide the funding which will actually attract where the business goes to.
So is it viable to recruit to build a space cluster from scratch? I mean, Pam, you're having some success, I'll admit, in Seattle and Washington State. It's been more organic. It's only recently that, you know, SpaceX decided to open up an office there. Most of the startups have been either Boeing spin-offs or, you know, have, you know, Aerojet started as rocket research in 1962 there, 1960. So it's been sort of organic. You're having success in actually bringing new companies in. Can you talk about how you're doing that?
It's not easy. No, Midland being an oil and gas, our whole economy is based on oil and gas. So our leaders wanted us to concentrate totally on diversifying the economy so that our children and their children will have other types of occupations so that you don't always have to work in the oil and gas. Starting a cluster industry is extremely difficult. That's why it's to have, like he says, the talent, the workforce skills. One thing that made it a little easier for Midland is that our skills are very transferable over to the aerospace and commercial space industry. Jeff Grayson will attest to this, that, of course, he's an engineer. We're a really exciting place because every other person you meet is an engineer or a geologist. So take that at face value. But we also have a lot of skilled labor in the machining, composites, and those type of fields. You've got to have that base to attract the industry. You know, they're bringing their employees in, but you've got to be able to have that workforce. One of the things also is with all of the machine shops, and you can outsource a lot of your work. And the tanks that we have for the altitude chamber, the large vacuum tanks, which are 8,000 feet, cubic feet or whatever, those were all built in the Midland area. So we have the capabilities to do a lot of things that you might not be able to get. It would be very difficult to have transported that size of a tank to our area, so it was nice to have it built there. We have the University of Texas. I think you've got to have your educational facilities too. We have the University of Texas, our altitude chamber. We are actually giving the University of the Permian Basin, UT of the Permian Basin, 100 free hours for research in our altitude chambers, which we hope stems more R&D for the commercial space industry and gets our kids interested in space.
The question of infrastructure, I think, comes up, and you all have unique sets of infrastructure. Ofer, you've got an incubator that you've created. You know, Pam, the public's going to own a altitude chamber, and I think, Tim, you mentioned that there's some shared infrastructure for the satellite industry in the Isle of Man. We can't all have NASA space centers, right? And we don't, right? None of us do. So how important do you think developing that public infrastructure as a way to seed your cluster is?
I believe it's extremely important because if each NewSpace company would have to own its own vacuum chamber, vibrator, and more important is to know-how. Space is hard. You know, we used to say that in order to make $1 million in space, you have to start with 100 million. You need access to know-how. And the fact that the incumbent space industries are dealing with $200, $500 million contracts, they still have an excess amount of manpower that can mentor the new space companies and help them get by. With regards to your first question, the most important thing is that we need some success stories, because most of the high-tech industry in Israel, which is extremely successful, is about IT, communication, internet, and biotech. And as soon as you have some success stories, and we have some in here in the Silicon Valley, others will follow, because it's harder, there's more risk, it takes far longer to have your exit strategy in place, and people are.
So how about some questions from the audience? No one took my invitation to jump to the top, but please.
Hello. I'm actually from, I grew up there, my family's still there, so I know how sort of entrenched and drilled in, no pun intended, the oil and gas industry is into, everything. So I guess this question is directed at Pam, but it's relevant to everyone, and that is, how do you get someone who spent their whole life seeing everyone in their family, all their friends work in oil and gas, decide to stop that and go work for some space company that just came in? Like, how do you get people to do that? And then two, do you see sort of the old industries and the new industries getting friction? I know in Texas the land is super important, so if you need a big area for launch and you have somebody else wanting that land to drill on, how do you deal with that?
What was that last part? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
First of all, do you see and how do you deal with the old industry, so the old oil and gas and the new space interests? Like, do you see them conflicting or bumping into each other, and how do you kind of resolve that sort of thing?
Oil and gas is a very risky business, and I think that's why our oil and gas people of Midland see this as the same type of industry that we have. They're risk takers, they like new, they're all entrepreneurs, they like to take risk. A lot of them go to Vegas every weekend, no. But we have found that the excitement in our school district and our young people is just phenomenal for the space industry. I mean, a lot of them are going on to engineering schools and things, but it's just, I'm in a Rotary Club, and our scholarship students that come in and all of our Student of the Week kids, I can't even remember, there's probably at least 10 this year that are in the space industry, because I think that they see the opportunity that they could have to come back to Midland and work in a different field. So it's been a good transfer of, I think.
Over to the side.
So on the topic of talent, again, diving a little bit deeper, how do you see, sorry, let me start over. How do you foster sort of the inherent multidisciplinary nature of space, in the sense that finding the right co-founder with the complementary knowledge in order to develop the systems for space can be really difficult. So how do you offer these types of services? Have you thought about that?
As I said before, the best place to find a co-founder is to go to a place to get proper education, such as the International Space University. Major startups like Spire and Planet Labs were founded by ISU alumni, because during that time you get to know your buddy and you get to know that he may come from a different country or a different discipline, but together you can make something bigger. The other way is to have your buddies for your military service, like most Israeli startups. They just go out from the military service, from a technological unit, and they just keep the team only doing now a civilian thing, like Checkpoint, a small data security company that was formed by ex-guys. So education is the education and your buddies, because you have to trust them and you're going to be working really hard. There has to be a trust and complementarity.
Yeah, I'd add to that up in the Puget Sound region, we have a very active AIA chapter. Sean runs an organization called Space Entrepreneurs that tries to get people to interact together. This has been a nascent cluster in our state for a long, long time, and only recently we've been trying to get folks together through something called the Washington State Space Coalition. In our first meeting, Rob Meyerson from Blue Origin and Chris Lewicki from Planetary Resources and Roger Myers from Aerojet said they'd never been in the only place they'd ever been in the same room together was at a conference in Colorado. And so they were grateful to have us, the state, bring those folks together, and now we're meeting on a quarterly basis, and we have 35 different companies that are coming, and so just creating that opportunity to interact, I think, is really important for a cluster.
Just a very quick follow-up. I completely agree with the university angle. I think that's a strong connection there, because universities right away have a multidisciplinary pool of people there working on different disciplines, and there's an opportunity to kind of have a cross-functional, multidisciplinary team formed at a university. So very quickly, one thing that the Indian government is doing through the space agency is the space agency is giving preferential pricing and preferential access to IP to several universities in India, namely the IIT universities, which is similar to the MIT here. And what those universities are doing are developing, some are developing satellite systems, and they're using folks in that university from various different disciplines, electrical engineers, aerospace engineers, et cetera, down the line. And there's some fledgling groups forming out of that potentially would be companies. So it happens here all the time. Stanford produced Skybox, right? So there's several examples in the space industry as well.
How do growth of a cluster, the inorganic versus the organic style growth? So when you look at the way the UAE, the UAE and Singapore are going about it, in Singapore you've got Spring and OST, and they are flat out offering money. You go to Spring if you've got the right business plan and you're willing to bring in. Sorry, I'll put my face right on it. That they're willing to do the upfront funding, and they're essentially becoming the lead investor. So when you look at Singapore, the space activity crazy. So I'm going to speak loud because this thing's going. So they're doing it in a very inorganic way. So the way a lot of you were talking is very organic. Get that partnership with academia. Bring that smarts out, find the right business people, go find your money. Where Singapore is saying, we've got money, bring your smart people. And it's working. The challenge is for US companies, we can't really access it. So that's like I guess that's the one advantage you have in the States. But how do you address this inorganic hunt for these businesses and offer in place of that?
Let me just drop in. The space market is divided into two equally sized markets, the US and the rest. And in order to be able to sell outside, you have to develop and keep the IP outside. So many companies have development sites outside the US, keeping the IP there, and then you can tap both, at least in the commercial market. And one comment from before I forget, the government funding is IP free, no equity, so it's rather neat.
So, anyone else want to address the question about creating from whole cloth? Okay. Sure.
So all of you in your respective regions have obviously created advantages financially for different startups, but have you also worked with trying to recruit human capital of any sort and trying to retain that human capital in each area? Skilled labor.
Your question was about human capital, retaining human capital?
Yeah, skilled labor of where you
Recruitment,
get.
yeah.
Yeah.
We, yes, we concentrate on recruiting. We also work with our existing industry, but our is recruiting talent. We also do a lot of recruitment for talent for our existing industries. We go around the nation trying to bring new talent to Midland. We've been the lowest unemployment in the nation for several years. That's changed a little bit with the price of oil changing, but we've always struggled to keep the talent. We've also realized that attracting talent and bringing new people in, the quality of life has to improve. So we've improved our amenities throughout the city, our downtown, our central business district. A lot of our corporations have built new campuses to try to attract talent, putting in the kind of amenities that the young people, we used to move because you had a job to go to. Nowadays they move because they want to go to that place. So that's been a real hard thing for Midland to adjust to. So we work really hard on getting our talent advised of what we have to offer. I mean, we may not be the largest city, but we have we make our own fun. So.
You know, we're blessed in the greater Seattle region with an incredibly low unemployment rate. I think there's like 7,000 jobs at Amazon posted on their website. Organizations believe there's 25,000 unfilled STEM jobs in Washington State now because we're just not producing enough. Thankfully, in the aerospace industry, you know, at least at the engineering level, companies are usually able to recruit from around the nation, and folks generally want to come, whether you're going to work for Blue Origin or for Boeing. But we're investing heavily on the manufacturing side. Legislature has pledged an additional $1 a year to fund 1,000 student slots each year in manufacturing at the community and technical college level, and we're really trying to that up, but there's a huge need. I know there's people in the Seattle region talking about going out to and actually doing talent recruitment as well, but we're not quite there yet. Sean.
Sean McClinton, Space Entrepreneur Seattle. Been working with Alex and everybody else, I guess, in this with a more grassroots approach in terms of growing entrepreneurship. I'm just curious that you guys have kind of touched on these points, but it sounds like each of you is seeing growth in entrepreneurship. I think you mentioned one company, you know, your company was first, and now you're seeing kind of 10. I think, Alex, you said about 30-ish in the state that are considered true space plays. Where do you see that trend going kind of more numerically? And then where you know, the hot spots for entrepreneurship coming from? Is that, you mentioned university, is that the best place, or are these kind of corporate either spin-offs or disgruntled employees, or, you know, other places? Where are these entrepreneurs coming from? So I guess two parts.
Get quite a lot of inquiries from the various shows we go to. We go to, obviously, this one. We go to the satellite Paris in September. We go to the Satellite 20 event in Washington in March. So it's a case of keeping going to these events. I think you've got to keep attracting business in the space industry. You've got to commitment, and by going back and back and back, it shows you're serious about attracting people. You develop the contacts, you develop the networking. Because I think with all of us, you might have a very attractive product, but it all depends on when that product is needed in the business's business cycle. So you've got to keep your name to the fore. So when it's the right time for the business to relocate or expand or set up a subsidiary, that your proposition is there to the fore. So it's keeping that networking, it's keeping that profile up. I think that's how you get the businesses in.
I'll just quickly comment. I think on the numbers side of your question, I think you're also asking about where we see that growth headed as far as numbers. So I'm a firm believer that the space industry as a whole is very multidisciplinary. So we have different types of space companies, and there's a whole segment of the NewSpace companies that are focusing on software and data. So if you were to ask some people within Spire, Planet Labs, or Skybox, and ask them, are you a space company or a data company? A lot of them would say they're a data and analytics company. And so what's growing now in Bangalore, India, is a lot of emphasis on software analytics and data analysis relevant to space, meaning utilizing space images and extracting data that's usable in various industries. Like a lot of that data is going towards oil and gas, actually, for oil exploration, pipeline monitoring, understanding oil supply, understanding oil usage, et cetera. And so that segment of space is actually, I think, poised to grow exponentially, the data and software analytics side. Industries that really start up overnight. I mean, think how fast the Internet 1.0 industry took off. Within 3 or 4 years in the late 90s, it went from a few million to a few billion right away. And so I tend to be optimistic, but I think the data side of space is poised to grow exponentially in India.
Okay.
This question is directed to Amarish. So India has extremely high power demand, and it continues to increase. It has extremely high population density and vast quantities of solar resource. So that all sort of seems like a perfect storm for development and expansion of photovoltaic technology, especially because India produces some of the best engineers in the world. And development in photovoltaics is also very important for the future of space industry. So do you see India as having a role in the development of miniaturization of photovoltaics, developing a better battery storage capacity as part of its space industry?
Great question. So I guess I'll answer it in two parts. Separate from the space industry, the Indian government actually has quite a few incentives for solar development. There's a solar thermal government allotment for solar thermal companies to grow in India. Some of those are government grants, some of those are interest-free loans, and some are actually just straight up free land to put your solar thermal on. And that's occurring in various states in India now, and it's been very successful. So solar thermal is growing quite extensively in India. There's a similar program for photovoltaics in northern India right now. So on the pure energy side, it is happening, and it's happening well in India. So the government incentives are actually working, where European and Chinese companies are collaborating with Indian companies, and a lot of American companies are there as well, collaborating with Indian companies to develop that technology. Within the space industry, though, to get your question, nothing's happening there. So there's no space-specific development of PV. Will it happen? Maybe. I don't foresee that in the near future. I still think within space specifically, there'll be more pure play space type development where they have satellite development, software development, analytics development specific to space. Energy may follow after that, but it's occurring without space currently quite well.
Thank you.
Doug.
I'm Doug King from the Museum of Flight up in Seattle. We're thrilled that all of you are headed our way next year. I wanted to go back to this talent issue for a minute. There are two things I think that you can't underestimate in the development of talent for this industry. One is the skepticism of the general public. We did a survey of our 500,000 visitors a year and asked, what do you think of the future of space? And people have no problem with a Star Trek version of the future, but they absolutely don't believe that this commercial space thing is going to happen. It reminds me tremendously of when I'm old enough to have worked here in Silicon Valley, when you could walk up to somebody from IBM and say, what do you think of a personal computer? And they would say, why do you want one? You're right on that cusp where the public doesn't believe the story yet, which is obviously, as companies here in the Valley proved, an incredible economic advantage if you can stick it out. So I think we've all got a lot of work to do to get to that tipping point where they go, wow, that does have something to do with my life. My kids will actually build and ride those rockets, and those business opportunities you're talking about are here today. The second thing I don't want you to underestimate is the effect that this can have on that next generation of you all. We live in a community with 90,000 aerospace workers that Alex has talked about, but their kids want to go work for you. When they can go do internships at Blue Origin or Planetary Resources or any of the companies here from Seattle, they'll come back. We have a high school on the campus, and they'll go off and come back and just with their eyes lit up about where I interned this summer. I'm sorry I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't tell you what I did, but I want to go work for that company. So I'd encourage all of you and others in the audience, really think hard about both how do we tip that public opinion thing, and how do we put these stories in front of the kids from middle school on up that are going to be you, let alone the thousands of engineers out there trying to make a wing 2% more efficient that can get very lit up about the kinds of stories that you're telling. So we welcome you next year, and I'd love to hear educational initiatives that you've all generated that we.
I rely on Doug to provide ours, so how about you?
I was just going to say, we've got to fly. Somebody's got to get suborbital to get the excitement so that they can see, the hands-on what's actually possible. So hopefully this year somebody will be flying suborbital and help commercial space move forward in the public eye.
I think it's getting the young people sort of fired up to take an interest. They'll then look at it'll open their eyes to the career opportunities before them. We were very lucky on the Isle of Man in that a company called Excalibur Almaz brought their equipment to the Isle of Man. They brought 2 Russian space stations and 4 Russian space capsules. And we had a whole program where every school on the Isle of Man went to see all the hardware. And we had one open day. The population of the Isle of Man is 80,000 people. And on one day, 8,000 people, a tenth of the population, went to one place on the Isle of Man to see the equipment. And again, it's actually being able to see it and touch it and feel it is so inspiring. You can sort of watch it on TV, but if you can actually see it and touch it as the people on the Isle of Man did with the Excalibur Almaz equipment, it really enthused the population and the school kids. And from that, they then did projects in school about space. And it's that type of viral development is very important.
Great. Well, I want to thank my panelists. This was a really interesting conversation for me, and I hope for the audience. And I'm sure you all have business cards that you'd be happy to give to any of these folks who are considering relocation or a new investment in a new plant. The exciting thing for me about this industry is that there are opportunities for all of us, right? West Texas and Seattle are connected through Blue Origin now. You know, there's an opportunity in India and the Isle of Man of all places. I mean, you know, and Israel. And so we're not all going to have launch facilities, and we're not trying to do that here, but we think we can be a great place for software engineers to and figure out how the cloud is going to work for space. So anyway, thank you, and I look forward to spending the rest of the day with you and meeting more of the folks from the show. So I think we're going to
Thank you. Thank you for joining us in the first part of the morning session. I have a few announcements and reminders. All the exhibits are next door. Please check them out. We still have plenty of lunch tickets for today, so if you're interested, please go to the registration desk. All tickets, about 5. That's Saturday night. So if you're interested, also please go to the registration desk to purchase them. Thank you very much, and enjoy your morning coffee.
Not-for-profits like the SDA and the Satellite Interference Group. We've got some of the traditional satellite operators, and then we've got some of the NewSpace type ventures like Excalibur Almaz, and also the education through the ISU. Okay, thank you. That was my introduction.
Pamela Welch is the executive director for the Midland Development Corporation in Midland, Texas, and has been there since 2006 as director of business retention, expansion, and vice president of business development. We've heard a lot about Midland at this conference already, and so congratulations on your work.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about how you've made it happen.
Okay, we are the new person on the block, and but Midland, and what I really have to do is explain where Midland is to people most of the time. In fact, on my card, I have a map on the back that shows you where we are in Texas. But we are in West Texas, and President Bush always used to say that Midland, when he lived there, that the sky's the limit, but now we call it the sky is no longer the limit. But we are a community of entrepreneurs because of the wildcatting of the oil and gas industry. So we're used to new frontiers. We started the oil and gas. We are the second largest oil and gas producing shale in the world. So we have more oil wells than we do people. And that's one of the attractions that the commercial space industry has found, is the fact of the open space out in West Texas. Blue Origin is just down the road from us, and West Texas is a desert climate, so it works well for the aerospace and the commercial space industry. I can figure out which one goes up. Is it? We have, of course, in Texas, there's a lot of aerospace companies. The commercial space companies so far that are there are the Blue Origin, SpaceX, X-Core Orbital Outfitters, and Firefly. There is a lot of other aerospace companies in Texas. We have 4 spaceports now. I believe they've already talked about them. Ours is the Midland International Air and Spaceport. You have the Boca Chica Beach for SpaceX in Brownsville. and then the new Houston Ellington Field and Blue Origin site in West Texas. The aviation is not new to Texas. 1,000 workers in the aerospace industry. We also have 15 active military bases, which supply a lot of workforce for the aerospace industry. The Office of the Governor, I'll have to talk instead of just about Midland. I'll have to talk. The governor would be upset if I didn't talk about them. He was just in New York. Y'all are lucky he wasn't out here, but he'll probably be out in California soon. Governor Perry did a lot with the aerospace and the commercial space industry.
Strategy. How are they going to make money? The right answers. It needs to be a simple business model. Is it a prototype? Is it beta or an alpha? Cash flow, looking for break even in about a year, little or no additional investment needed. They're looking for an experienced team with a coachable CEO, a clear path to profit and return, early meaningful contact with potential customers, and a realistic valuation. I've taken this quote from Warren Buffett. Again, if you these people are busy people. If you're going to go before them, it's getting that 1 minute elevator pitch, a 1-page executive summary, no more than 10 slides, demonstrate intelligence, energy, and integrity. So, okay, how did the Isle of Man start? How did we become a local space industry? A lot of you in the audience today probably know the name of Chris Stott. Chris started up his business in the Isle of Man in 2000 when he formed Mansat. Mansat basically provides orbital filing slots for companies. In 2004, the Isle of Man government brought in zero corporate tax for space companies, a great incentive in the longer term. Again, sometimes that's overlooked. People are concentrated on getting the business going, but it's actually having that business located somewhere that when it is profitable, they get the maximum return. In 2005, we were successful in attracting Inmarsat and SES to establish on the Isle of Man. I took up my role in 2005. In 2008, the International Space University announced the creation of the International Institute of Space Commerce on the Isle of Man. So that was a great endorsement from the ISU. 2009, the world's 5 largest satellite operators established the Space Data Association on the Isle of Man. Again, that was a great development for the SDA. Prior to that, companies kept all the data themselves as commercially sensitive, but actually they decided it's going to be more beneficial to actually pool that data. And following on the heels of the SDA, the Satellite Interference Group also set its headquarters on the Isle of Man. And we have an SSPI chapter set up on the Isle of Man in 2013. I'll just go through these very, very quickly. Let's talk about the zero corporate tax. On the Isle of Man is an insurance premium tax and launched our own insurance. There are government grants, 40% for all sorts of startup requirements. There's the ability to file 40 geospatial orbital pilot slots through Manstat, and also the launch licenses through the UK Space Agency for anybody looking for launch licenses. Again, I won't bore all of those out given the time we have available, but you can see further benefits of the Isle of Man. And these are some of the businesses that are on the Isle of Man already. So we've got the non-space government, whether that's a national government or a local. Again, having that government behind you really helps to take you forward. Creating the right regulatory environment, depending on whether it's a nation state or a state or a local town or local city. Again, having the right regulatory environment is important. Creating industry awareness, again, it's letting people know you're out there. It's letting people know you have something to offer, to make them look at you, to let them decide whether you're the place to go. And demonstrating commitment. Again, people, I think it's, because this is such a rapidly growing area, it attracts other people thinking, oh, they have a local space industry, maybe we should too. But it's important that if you do put your head above the parapet, that you demonstrate that commitment. You're going to be there for the long term. You're not just in there in the short term to get the business and then move on to another focus, whether it's biotech or whatever. It's showing that commitment in the space area. Just moving on now, what I'd like just to do is talk a little bit about the financing side. I like this quote: to put business in space, you must first take out the space out. Again, I think we've all seen people go to financiers for funding for their projects, and they say, no, this is going to be the next great thing, you really must back this. But at the end of the day, it's a business, and you've got to strip it down to the basics.